Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all, and welcome to another fun-filled, exciting adventure of the Smoking Barrel. I'm Rustin Edwards, based in Geneva, with my conga line dancing Hawaiian shirted co-host Matt Stanley, based in tepidly warm Dubai. Ramadan Mubarak to you all.
Yes. No, I'm in a good mood today. It's unusual. So remember this day, people, 26th of March, 2024. Stanley's in a good mood. No,
Is that Arsenal actually won a game?
well, I mean, no, there's been a listen, mate. You don't even know what you call it soccer. You don't just don't talk to me about football. Anyway, morning everyone. Hope all is well. Yeah, the aircon's broken in my house. So I think I'm a bit delusional and I don't know, like a little bit crazy, but I'm in a good mood. So you've seen this shirt before. I was in Kuala Lumpur a couple of months ago because I'm so committed to the globe's favorite energy podcast that we're a global brand. But yes, aircon broken, being fixed as we speak. All is good, all is well. Easter's coming up, and I'm going on holiday next Thursday, which I'm very much looking forward to. So we're gonna have a bit of a break. We'll be back. I think on the 9th of April, won't we?
Yeah, 9th of April. I think that's how it's going to work out here. But speaking of being back and on its back foot, we got crude oil at 86.54, down 21 cents this morning.
Yeah.
So it seems like we're just still muddling along in the same range with a little bit of geopolitical support and macroeconomic resistance. It seems to be the broken record of the year so far.
Yeah, it does. And look, when we recorded last week, Brent was trading at 86.48. So, I mean, I would say that because of rising escalations and a threat of a wider conflict, etc., Brent priced in about another $3 a barrel, something like that. And it's stayed pretty steady. I mean, look,
well, I would say this is probably more akin to the Ukrainians actually making more and more strikes against Russian oil infrastructure, and that's actually put a very big fear of supply into the market. They've hit at some estimates 15% of Russia's refining capacity has been hit by drones over the last 2 weeks. They hit another oil terminal yesterday in the middle of Crimea. So the Ukrainians continue with their unfettered warfare against Russian oil infrastructure, and that's going to keep, I think, a lot of people on the bid versus people wanting to sell, because if they hit an oil export terminal, we can easily lose 1 million barrels of exports out of Russia.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, look, it's we spoke about it last week, didn't we? And how much that was worth, and what it meant for gas oil exports, what it meant for balances, what it means for arbitrage. Very much those risks are still there. And like you said, the attacks continue, which is why I think Brent has stayed in the higher end of this range. But look, just quickly, just sort of something sort of breaking. We're hearing about a boat or a container ship that's hit a bridge in the US state of Baltimore, and it's collapsed the bridge. Workers may be in the river. It's a boat called the Dali. We can bring it up here on,
Yeah, the bridge that was hit was the Francis Scott Key Bridge, which is one of the major beltway bridges around the city of Baltimore, and bypassing the port. It crosses over the Chesapeake Bay section that goes into the port of Baltimore.
You can see there. This is
new bridge.
Yeah, no, look, it's very sorry to hear. There's a rescue boat. So there's another one down here, another one there. So this is on the Marine Traffic app. Not a good time to sell a product from Kepler at all. I'm not saying that, but no, look, I hope everyone's all right. I mean, that's pretty. I mean, you as a mariner, I mean, that's hit that bridge with a lot of force, I'm assuming.
It depends on what was going on, but yeah, it is a I can't remember if that's a suspension bridge or a freestanding bridge, but nevertheless, if you hit it one of the pilings in the water, you're going to do some damage and dislodge the roadway. So, nevertheless, fortunately, the collision happened around midnight, 1 o'clock, when traffic levels are fairly low.
Yeah.
So hopefully there's not too many fatalities and only minor injuries. So our hearts and minds go out to those who may be impacted by this.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's I'm not laughing. It's an ironic laughter, but it just every day there seems to be just some form of peril somewhere, wherever it is. I mean, this devastating attack in Moscow on Friday. I think 139 dead and 180 injured, and you know, take the politics out of what's happening in Russia or in Ukraine. It's largely irrelevant when these horrific attacks are going on. And now, of course, I know these. The problem is that it kind of a ship hitting a bridge and hopefully everyone's okay, right? A ship hitting a bridge and causing it to collapse is kind of like, oh, okay. Do you know what I mean? Whereas, like, I think 10 years ago, it would have been like, holy shit, like, oh my God, what is going on? And you'd be kind of glued to your. But news values now, it's extraordinary. The level or the gravity of a certain situation that commands a headline these days is so dramatic. Without wishing to put hyperbole against anything, it's I don't know, it's frightful. But it's cyber Russ, totally. Hope everyone's okay. Hope anyone who's is fine. Thoughts go out. So breaking news: boat called the Dali, a container ship in Baltimore, hitting a bridge in Baltimore, causing it to collapse. Anyway, yeah, going back to Brent then. So yeah, higher end of the range. I mean, look, I had a call last week with our head crude analyst Victor Katona, who's great. He tells a really good story and it's backed up by absolute facts and years of algorithms. But he seems to think that the biggest needle mover that will happen in the next couple of weeks is what will happen with Venezuelan sanctions. Look, if there's anything to move the needle to Brent above 90, that's probably the one catalyst. What do you think?
Well, I don't really think so because even with the release of sanctions, there hasn't been that dramatic increase in the amount of crude oil being removed out of Venezuela. I mean, they have had a marginal increase in production, but they've only gone up about 100,000 barrels a day.
Yeah,
Uh, I think the big thing there is that the Biden administration was kind of walking back the idea that they're going to snap full sanctions back on Venezuela last week, as I believe one of the spokesperson for the Department of State said, well, it is a compliance with the Barbados Accords that they're more worried about having a free and fair election. And Maduro has, at least from a lot of other observers' standpoint, has violated that by arresting the competition. Uh,
yeah,
and so, how can you have a free and fair election if nobody's allowed to stand against him? But nevertheless, there's still candidates who are standing against him in the election, and so he may actually get a pass and get a reinstatement of the export license. Uh,
yeah. I mean, it is an interesting one
well,
because
it is an interesting one, and I hate to interrupt you on this one,
no,
but it's also a case that it is an election year in the United States. And the worst thing that the Biden administration could have is have crude prices go to $100 and impact the voter sentiment going into the election in November. And so I think you see that not only with this kind of walking back to the Venezuelan sanctions, but also a bit of the warning to the Ukrainians to let's not hit too much Russian oil infrastructure, please. Let's back off on doing that,
yeah,
um, which was widely reported in the Financial Times at the end of the week last week. Um, and so, I think you do have the Biden administration trying to control a bit of the narrative to ensure that they don't have an inflationary strike or spike, excuse me, going into November.
yeah, yeah. No, I think you're right. I mean, it's a big point, but I mean, just going back to Venezuela because I know Q3 and the middle of Q3, that our chats are going to be dominated by what's happening with US election time. And actually, we're looking to put together a conference on the day of the election when Bari Week is due to happen here in Dubai, which is the 5th of November. So I'll be wearing my Donald Trump outfit at that particular event and, make Bari Week great again. I'm joking. God, poor. Sorry, a laboured humour. Can you? I'm just going to share my screen. I just want to go back to the India story just quickly with the Venezuelan story when it's come to exports into India. So you can see here. Look, September 2020, 285,000 barrels a day that was going into. I've got here. Let's go destination countries. Obviously, I've got here India. 200, and then nothing for September until December. So over 3 years. And in the last few months, they've started to, to drop off. I mean, this is a cargo, two cargoes of Marais going from into Reliance.
Right,
And
but
there's,
you'd expect that though, because in 2020, okay, Venezuela was a big supplier of oil into India. Now that India's got a lot more options with the Russian oil as well as other Middle Eastern oils. So it is a case of is Venezuela going to displace Russian or what? That's probably the whole thing, is it displace Urals out of the Indian supply network.
yeah, yeah. Can you turn off my screen a minute? Because I want to talk about it. Sorry, guys. I know I work for a tech company, but turns out I'm not a tech guy. Um, they pay me to talk the talk, not walk the walk. Correct. No, I think this is where you're starting to see a bit of oil politics at play, right? Are the US putting India, Reliance, and Barney, the richest man in Asia, under pressure, saying, "Don't buy more Venezuelan"? Are they saying to them, "Don't buy Russian"? Now, I just want to put that into context. Um, so the average landed cost of a barrel of Venezuelan crude into India in January was $60.60 a barrel. The equivalent Russian is $78 a barrel. I've made this point and perhaps laboured it. I acknowledge that a net importer the size of India, the world's most populous country that relies on cheap feedstock to balance up the fiscal budgets and make Ambani even richer, goes where the cheapest feedstock is, which is clearly Venezuela. This is where things get politicized, isn't it? Because, you know,
Well, you get politicized, but you also have to think it from a refining standpoint. Venezuelan crude that they're taking in is very heavy sour crude.
yeah,
And so it has a very high fuel yield, a very good distillate yield, and very little on the light inside. So the question I would have is that because the Indian economy is doing what it's doing and they have the growth that they have, do they not want to limit the amount of heavy fuel that they produce in lieu of more gasoline and distillates, which they can use to help fester and grow their economy?
okay, fair point, well made, right? And I think that is something that isn't being discussed because it doesn't sell newspaper headline columns. You know, people want to say India stopped buying Venezuela because of pressure from the US. Well, no, we're not buying Venezuelan crude because we want some more gasoline yielding crude. So we're going to go because gas oil refining margins are
Well,
up and we're going to need
and,
it
and,
into
and
driving
it's
season.
the same story about Dangote. Then Dangote refinery in the middle of Lagos, Nigeria,
Yeah,
million barrels a day of crude production in Nigeria that they could choose from, yet they're importing WTI from the United States. Now,
right.
any market that I've ever been in, the incumbent crude, which is the most local, least long supply chain, would have priority in any refinery. And then you bring in your long arbitrage crude. However, WTI comes in. Why does WTI come in? Because it has a light yield. It has little fuel, more naphtha, it creates more gasoline. And what does Nigeria want? More gasoline.
Yeah,
And so,
again, a very good point, but it doesn't sell columns. People will take that story, manipulate it somewhat, kind of get a bit of truth out of it, saying, well, the NMPC crews are committed to equity players and to people who have signed term contracts, so they have to source alternative feedstocks. Whereas they're not actually saying, well, I can actually run my refinery more efficiently, and on a landed basis, it's probably cheaper for me to buy Midland crude than it is to buy stuff that I can see out of the refinery that's loading out of an FPSO, right?
yep.
Sorry, you got really close then. Um, uh, jeez, sorry. No, it's an important point, and it's trade flows are important. You know what's happening. People are okay. Who's buying Venezuelan? Are people going to buy Venezuelan? Who's siding with who? Blah 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 blah. But at the end of the day, if you're running a refinery, you optimize it to the best of your abilities. So, yeah, but just going back to what will cause Brent to pop above 90, I mean, just take out what we just discussed in detail there. If Venezuela do get sanctioned again because there's suspected foul play, whatever the reason might be, and Chevron are boxed from buying Venezuelan crude, it will give
Well,
Brent a pop.
Well, Chevron is on a different license than the export license granted by the Department of Justice.
Okay, so
So
even so,
Chevron, So
That
Chevron will
was
still be allowed to bring their barrels
right.
in. So it is just that incremental barrel that gets dropped from the market of heavy sour crude.
You believe that?
Yes.
Okay. I just think that I'm not doubting you. I'm just
And I still doubt the fact that politics in the United States will trump, pardon the pun, any any reduction in crude flow. Because
he's the gift. He's the gift that keeps on giving, any Donald
yes,
Trump.
he is. Yes, he
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
And if you even look at what the U.S. is doing with the SPR, I mean, they've increased the purchases of the into the SPR. They canceled the forward sales that they were mandated to do by Congress, and now they're buying up to 4.5 million barrels of crude now for September and August. Um,
Yeah, but do you know? I mean, the papers are obviously full, and you know me and my thoughts on the Daily Mail, etc. But he's slated to make to he's Bloomberg put him in the top 500 billionaires. He's going to have a net worth today of 6.5 billion. I thought he was skint. I thought he's all his tax problem, and he's got to pay $500 million, which I think has just been reduced for his bond in New York. But with this investment he's got on the tech side, is it this Truth or something, some social media platform? His worth today will again be 6.5 billion. He is. I hate to say it, and I'm not American. He is the American dream. He's a phoenix, and he's come back. And everyone thought he was kind of on his, and he's got the overwhelming Republican vote. It seems like, and now he's in the top 500 richest people in the world again. You can't keep him down. And yes, he's a Wally, right? He is, and he'll probably stand up and say, "Yes, do you know what, Matt? I am a plonker." But he works, right? It works, and what it does to energy policy. I know we're going to cover later on in the year, but what a story that is, like I said, the gift that keeps on giving.
hey, his net worth has gone up and his fine has been dropped. Enough
Not
said.
a bad day. That's not a bad day.
Not a bad day indeed.
All right, so sticking over that side of the pond, interest rates last week, it was a mammoth week if you're an economist, keeping up with everything. Interestingly, today, not that it's going to move the needle at all, but the Sri Lanka Central Bank reduced their interest rates by 50 basis points, which is a kind of a surprise move. I mean, considering how much turmoil that economy has been in for the last 5 or 6 years, to encourage growth, the government have stabilised. It's quite an important decision, not in terms of what it means for global fiscal policy, but just what's happening in South Asia. There, I think is compared to other parts of the world, is kind of important in its own right.
Well, I mean, if you think in the Asian economy altogether, you've had Japan actually come back, get out of the negative interest rate scheme into positive interest rates for the first time since 2017, I believe,
Yeah,
which is a very long time to be sitting at negative interest rates. But nevertheless, it is the whole move. You had the Swiss central bank cut interest rates as well. So trying to weaken the Swiss franc versus other currencies around the world to help the economy in Switzerland, and help spur exports out because it's basically made Switzerland's exports very expensive.
yeah.
Uh, and so it hasn't really helped the economy here per se, but now that should give some extra stimulus. But nevertheless, I'm still a believer that the U.S. Federal Reserve will not do anything with interest rates in 2024, and possibly it's probably first half in the second half of 2025 is when they actually do make a cut. Because in the U.S. economy, you still have inflation still strong, job growth is okay, so the market, the economy is muddling along. There's no big issue. I think your biggest, how should I say, elephant in the room is the corporate real estate refinance that's going to have to happen here over the next 2 years,
In
and
where?
in Europe and the United States. That is probably the biggest, least spoken about story for the most part of financial outcome that could be a dramatic drag on the economy. Something somewhere around $2 or $3 trillion worth of real estate needs to be refinanced. And you're going from interest rates that were negative to flat to interest rates that are now 5 or 4%. And so that becomes a huge drag. On top of that, the cash flow for a lot of commercial real estate is not as high as it used to be because you have the work from home mindset still with a lot of companies. So they're not utilizing all the real estate, or they've scaled back their leasing from what they had before because, okay, I don't need 6 floors. I only need two now.
You know, I've got to be honest, I was completely naive to that. Um, so Jerome Powell says the housing market is in a very challenging situation right now. And interest rate cuts alone won't solve a long-running inventory crisis. The country is short between 3.5 and 5.5 million housing units. And this goes back to the global financial crisis. I mean, uh, just sticking on the US for a moment because it's important, but um, what I mean, what's your view on that? I mean, does that go back to the sort of 2008, 2009? Is that a good news story for investment?
well, it depends, because where is that housing crisis at? What market? Because the U.S. is a huge market, and they all have different price points. Buying a house in Oklahoma is not going to cost you as much as buying a house in Beverly Hills. Take the same home, put it on the same piece of land.
Yeah,
Uh, so nevertheless, so you do have that issue. So is it based on where the population is versus where the people are, of just a macro U.S. position saying, yeah, the U.S. needs an extra 3 to 4 million houses to house the population in general? But that being said, does that mean that the investment profile is not so much building new single family homes, but taking, say, corporate office space and converting that into housing?
yeah,
Because you don't need the office space, but you have a perfectly good building sitting somewhere that you could convert to a condo. As an example, not saying that we're in the real estate redevelopment business here in the Smoking Barrel, but we do try to look at other assets and other investments that could actually make sense and help paint the broader economic picture.
yeah. And like we said at the start of the year, we are sort of end of the year for the end of the year 2023, but looking ahead to 2024. You and I both said, what happens with interest rates is going to be the one main driver. But you look at what's happening in other markets. You know, um, the S&P 500, it's just at record highs. Bitcoin, we never use that as a bellwether on this podcast, a stupid thing, but what, $69,000 of Bitcoin, something like that. It's everywhere I've traveled so far this year, people are busy. They want to, apart from certain places in Europe, but people are busy. They're running around, and it's everyone wants to be rich and make money, and it seems like the world is. There was someone wrote about this last week. I don't know if it was on Bloomberg, that the world is kind of just steadily ticking along, and it's doing well. There's a French term. It's called mijoter, which there is no like for like translation in English, but it just means like a blip bubbling under the surface and just getting on with it. It's what you when you cook a stew. See, man of the people. But it's and I would argue that energy markets are fairly range bound. I know we've got a lot going on when it comes to maritime and energy security.
A lot going on with manipulation, with OPEC cutting so much volume from the market to support the price. I mean, the oil market, the energy market, if you didn't have the OPEC removing almost 7 million barrels of production from the market, we'd be in the 40s and $50 price range because the demand is not there to support all that crude.
Yeah, I mean that's it.
And
That is a good talking point, and that's something I asked Victor last week as well. If there wasn't all this conflict, I mean, where would we be? I mean, low 60s, I don't know. But yesterday we saw Russia orders companies to cut oil output to meet OPEC plus target in Q2.
right,
Um,
which in my mind, that's just politicking. Because again,
yes,
if you've lost 15% of your refining capacity, you are already cutting your exports out for Q2.
yes.
So is it a true cut, or is it just putting a label on the fact that Ukraine has been successful in eliminating your ability to produce oil for exports, and therefore you're painting it in a picture for the general public as oh, we're doing this to comply with OPEC plus.
Yeah, look, I mean, same. Yes, I agree with you, and it wouldn't be the first time. But I would argue that if they didn't do anything, that would be even more dangerous. So I think that this was to be expected. You probably won't hear another comment out of Novak, who's the deputy prime minister now, I think. So it's politicizing oil output again. But yeah, so okay.
But if we want to keep on with the real estate theme, the other piece of the global puzzle when it comes to global economy and stability is China still. The Chinese central government is trying to put pressure on banks to loan more money to private developers in order so they can fulfill their requirements because they haven't been actually moving very well. Evergrande has gone into complete receivership, I believe.
Does
Uh,
it?
yep. Country Garden, I believe, is also into that mode operandi, I believe. Other people have been arrested associated in the upper leadership of the companies in China for committing fraud or misrepresenting the health of their companies.
Just this for a headline. Chinese property developer Evergrande faces a $120 billion fraud accusation and its chairman is barred for life. Not good that. I mean, look, I think this will be another one that's going to be buried. I just think that
Well, but to me, it's part of the general undercurrent of overdevelopment that has happened around the world. And when you have empty buildings or uncompleted buildings that are sitting there, they become a drag on your overall economy because they're there. There's been capital invested, but you're not getting a return out of that capital. Same
it's
thing
fun.
with corporate real estate around in Europe, United States. Buildings have been built, they've been bought, they've been sold. They were bought at relatively high values, and now you have higher interest rates and lower appraisal values.
It's funny you say that because obviously that's the one talking point that us local, you know, expats have here in Dubai is, you know, the cost of living crisis is firmly embedded in now. It's not growing exponentially, but it's steadily growing in terms of, the overall cost of everything, but it's kind of plateauing, kind of settling down. And the ones talking point that people had were, let's call them drilled but uncompleted wells. So they laid down foundations and put in the infrastructure in terms of the services, gas and drainage, etc. But then after the last financial crisis, when Abu Dhabi had to step in for what was happening in Dubai, that high housing crisis, which was managed very well, lots of those developments, and I'm talking like the Palm Jebel Ali, which is like the Palm Jumeirah, but almost twice the size. That was built, tools down. Then you had this one at the bottom of the Palm Jumeirah called Dubai Pearl. That has now been knocked down and is being developed. The Palm Jebel Ali being redeveloped. The country here isn't in a bubble because there are no empty houses next to houses where people are paying double what they were worth 2 years ago. So I think the whole sort of exit out of what is a bubble isn't necessarily that, because we're in a relatively high interest rate environment and people are still borrowing over the last 20 years, and lots more people are moving here. The demographic has changed from it being the Russian population. They're now not here because UAE banks closed most of the accounts. So I'm sort of laboring a point here when it comes to property. I think that China is still in somewhat infancy when it comes to these mega cities. What's happening in Saudi. I think a third of the world's construction spend is in Saudi Arabia right now. Is that going to be the world's biggest construction disaster, or is it a case of, like Dubai, build it and they will come? We'll have to wait and see. But the China story, I just think there's too much on the line. I just don't think it holds the news value to cause the shock that it should do with the size of these defaults. I just think that China's economy is way too resilient. Chinese government are way too shrewd in how it will be,
Well, I would
releasing.
say maybe it's not resilience. Maybe it's that it's secretive enough where the bad news doesn't get out.
Yeah, potato, potato.
Well, speaking of potatoes and potatoes, I think we're pretty much well done here today.
Yes, 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 yes. Yeah, I did. I didn't show it yesterday. Sorry about that. It's the shirt and my no aircon. Who knew it?
Well, again, we want to our hearts and wishes go out for those. If anybody was injured in the Francis Scott Key Bridge attack, if
Yeah,
you have any uh, mind to donate, please look at your Red Cross, Red Crescent, or other aid facilities because there's a lot of people in the world who need help.
yeah,
Uh, Easter is around the corner, so happy Easter, all those
yeah. Absolutely.
celebrating over the weekend, and we look forward to seeing you all again.
Ciao.